My name is Arthur Cole. I am 62 years old. For 35 of those years, I was a fish and wildlife conservation officer for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I spent my life in the woods. I thought I knew them. I thought I understood the rules, the cycles of life and death, the quiet language spoken by the wind in the pines, and the snap of a twig under a heavy paw. I've tracked poachers for days. I've tranquilized cornered bears. I've pulled drowned hunters from icy rivers. I've seen what nature can do in all its casual brutality and its breathtaking beauty. I was a man who believed in the tangible world, in evidence, in the things you could see and touch and measure. That world ended for me 4 years ago, in a rented cabin at the end of a forgotten gravel road deep in the Allegheny National Forest. It was our annual trip, 4 of us, every October since we'd all gotten out of the service together decades ago. There was me, Corey, Jake, and Brian.
We weren't young men anymore, not by a long shot. But for 1 week a year, we could pretend. We'd hunt, fish, play cards, drink whiskey that was probably too expensive, and tell the same old lies about our glory days. It was a ritual, a grounding point in lives that had grown complicated with mortgages and marriages and grandkids. Corey was our rock, ex-Marine Force Recon. He ran a private security firm now, and he still moved with a quiet, coiled intensity that made you straighten your posture. He was meticulous, organized. He planned the logistics of the trip every year, from the meal prep to the emergency med kits. He was the one who found the cabin, advertised on some obscure outdoorsman forum. Off the grid, the listing boasted, last stop before true wilderness. Corey liked that. He liked the challenge. Jake was the heart of the group, a big, laughing man who owned a construction company and could fix anything with his bare hands and a roll of duct tape.
He was the eternal optimist, the one who could find the silver lining in a week of solid rain or a failed hunt. He was steady, dependable, the kind of man you wanted next to you when things went wrong. And then there was Brian. Brian was a salesman, always had been, quick with a joke, a little too loud, a little too fond of the whiskey. He was the life of the party, but there was a carelessness to him. He'd be the one to forget to latch the food cooler, attracting every raccoon in a 5-mile radius. He'd wander off a trail chasing a squirrel. We loved him for it mostly. He was the necessary chaos that kept the rest of us from taking ourselves too seriously. The cabin was exactly as advertised. It sat in a small clearing, surrounded by a dense wall of hemlock and oak. It was old, built of thick, dark logs, with a wide stone chimney that looked like it had been there for a century. The gravel road that led to it was more of a suggestion, a pair of ruts that snaked for 7 miles off the nearest paved county route. We had to engage the 4-wheel drive on Jake's truck to get through the last mile. There was no cell service, no electricity except for a noisy gas generator out back, no neighbors, just the trees, the sky, and a profound, ringing silence. It was perfect. We spent the first day settling in, unpacking the gear, stocking the pantry, cutting firewood. Corey, ever the professional, did a perimeter check of the clearing, noting the sight lines and the single point of entry from the road. Jake got the generator running and inspected the cabin's ancient propane heater. Brian, of course, broke out the whiskey before the first duffel bag was even unzipped. I took a walk around the edge of the woods, breathing in the cold, damp air that smelled of pine and wet earth. It felt right. It felt like coming home. The forest was quiet, but it was a normal quiet. The chittering of squirrels, the distant call of a blue jay, the rustle of leaves. The sounds of a world in balance. That evening, as dusk bled purple and orange through the trees, we sat on the porch. The first real chill of autumn was setting in. Brian was telling a long, rambling story about a client. Jake was cleaning his rifle, and Corey was studying a topographical map of the area. I remember just listening to the sounds of the woods settling down for the night. And that's when I noticed the first thing that was wrong. The sounds were fading. Not just settling down, but stopping. The crickets went silent. The birdsong ceased. Even the wind seemed to die in the treetops. It was a sudden, unnatural hush. The kind of silence that precedes a storm, but the sky was clear, filled with 1 billion sharp, cold stars. I looked over at Corey. He had stopped looking at his map. His head was up, his eyes scanning the tree line. He felt it too. "You hear that?" I asked, keeping my voice low.
Jake looked up from his rifle. "Hear what? It's dead quiet." "Exactly," Corey said. He folded the map slowly, never taking his eyes off the woods. Brian laughed, a loud, booming sound that felt like a violation in the stillness. "You two are getting jumpy in your old age. It's the woods. It gets quiet. Enjoy it." He took a swig of his drink, but the silence held. It was a heavy, expectant thing, a weighted blanket of nothing. We didn't stay on the porch much longer. The chill we felt had nothing to do with the temperature. We went inside, locked the door, and told ourselves it was just the isolation playing tricks on us. The next morning, the world seemed normal again. The sun was out, the birds were singing, and last night's unease felt like a foolish overreaction. We decided to do some scouting for deer sign. Corey and Brian went east, Jake and I went west. We agreed to meet back at the cabin for lunch. The woods were beautiful that day. The autumn leaves a riot of color.
The air was crisp and clean. Jake and I moved slowly, speaking in low voices. I was pointing out game trails, rubs on trees, the subtle language of the forest that had been my life's work. We were about a mile from the cabin when the smell hit us. It was the coppery, gut-wrenching stench of a fresh kill. We slowed down, moving with more caution. My first thought was a bear or a coyote pack had taken something down. It was part of the natural order. We found it in a small hollow, hidden by a thicket of mountain laurel. It had been a doe, a large one, but the scene was wrong, all wrong. I've seen hundreds of predator kills in my career. I know what a bear does to a carcass. I know how a pack of coyotes feeds. This was neither. The animal was torn open from brisket to pelvis, but it wasn't the work of teeth and claws in the way I understood it. The rib cage was shattered, the individual ribs snapped and bent outwards, like a giant had pried the chest cavity open with 2 hands.
The internal organs were gone, not eaten, just gone. There were no drag marks, no sign of a struggle. The ground around the doe was barely disturbed, aside from a few massive, indistinct prints in the soft earth that the leaf litter made impossible to read clearly. "What in God's name did this?" Jake whispered. He was pale. He'd been hunting since he was a boy. He knew what he was looking at wasn't right. I knelt, my mind racing through possibilities and discarding each one. A bear would have crushed the skull or broken the neck. It would have dragged the carcass to a more secluded spot to cache it. Coyotes would have torn at the flanks and hindquarters, leaving a messy, shredded scene. A cougar, though rare this far east, would have gone for the throat and covered the kill with debris. This was something else. This was destructive. It was wasteful. It felt less like feeding and more like a dissection. "I don't know," I said, and the admission felt like a lead weight in my gut.
For the first time in my professional life, I had no explanation. I took a few pictures with my phone, knowing they wouldn't do the scene justice. The scale of the violence was something you had to feel. We backed away slowly, the unnatural silence from the night before seeming to creep back into the sunlit woods.
When we got back to the cabin, Corey and Brian were already there. We told them what we'd found. Brian, true to form, made a joke. Must be one of those meth head bears you read about. Super strength and the munchies. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Corey didn't laugh. He looked at the pictures on my phone, his expression grim. He zoomed in on the shattered ribcage. The force required to do that, to snap green bone like that and bend it outwards, it's astronomical. He looked up from the phone, his eyes meeting mine. Whatever did that, Arthur, it's not in any field guide I've ever read. We tried to rationalize it.
Maybe it was a group of poachers, sick individuals who killed for sport. But why would they do that? And how? It made no sense. We spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of low-grade anxiety. The hunting trip was forgotten. We stayed close to the cabin, cleaning guns that were already clean, chopping wood we didn't need. Every sound from the forest made us jump. The easy camaraderie of the day before was gone, replaced by a tense, unspoken watchfulness. As night fell, we locked ourselves inside. We made dinner, but nobody had much of an appetite. We sat around the main room, the propane lanterns hissing, casting long, dancing shadows. Brian had been drinking steadily since we got back, his bravado fueled by alcohol. He kept insisting it was probably just some local pranksters trying to scare the city boys.
"They probably have a deer costume," he slurred, gesturing wildly with his glass. "Saw our truck coming up the road and decided to have some fun."
"Shut up, Brian," Corey said, his voice flat. He was cleaning his handgun, a big .45 caliber semi-automatic, laying the parts out on a cloth on the table with deliberate, precise movements. The metallic clicks were the only sounds in the room. The first sound from outside came around 9 o'clock. It was a heavy, rhythmic thump. 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 It wasn't the sound of an animal walking on 4 legs. It was bipedal. It had the weight and cadence of a man, but it was too heavy. Each footfall seemed to press into the earth with immense force. It was circling the cabin, just at the edge of the clearing. We all froze. Brian's drunken smile vanished. Jake put down his book, his hand hovering near the shotgun he'd propped against his chair. Corey stopped cleaning his pistol and began to reassemble it with swift, economical motions.
My heart was a cold hammer against my ribs. I stood up and moved to the window, peering through a crack in the curtains. I couldn't see anything. The clearing was bathed in pale moonlight, but the tree line was a wall of impenetrable black. Then came a new sound, a long, sharp scrape against the logs of the back wall. The sound of something hard and sharp being dragged across the wood, like a nail, but 100 times larger. My mind flashed to the doe's ribs, bent outwards. I imagined a claw, thick as a railroad spike, testing the integrity of our shelter. "It's right outside," Jake whispered, his voice tight with fear. Brian stood up, his chair scraping loudly on the wooden floor. "That's it. I've had enough of this crap." He was drunk and angry, a dangerous combination. "It's kids. I'm gonna go out there and scare the hell out of them." "Brian, no!" Corey hissed, snapping the slide back on his pistol. "Sit down, now." But Brian wasn't listening.
He grabbed one of the heavy maglite flashlights from the mantelpiece.
"They think they can screw with us? They picked the wrong cabin."
He started toward the door. I moved to intercept him, grabbing his arm. "Don't be an idiot. You don't know what's out there." He shook me off.
"It's nothing, Arthur. A couple of punks in a Halloween costume."
He fumbled with the deadbolt.
"Watch this. They'll be crying for their mommies in about 5 seconds.
Corey was on his feet now, his pistol raised but pointed at the ceiling. "Brian, I'm not telling you again. Step away from the door."
It happened too fast. Brian twisted the lock and yanked the heavy wooden door inward. He stood silhouetted in the doorway, a defiant, foolish figure. He flicked on the flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a clean white tunnel through the darkness. "All right, you little jerks. Party's over," he yelled. The beam landed on a figure standing at the edge of the trees about 30 yards away.
And in that moment, my entire understanding of the world shattered. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was something impossible, a living nightmare ripped from the darkest corners of human folklore. It stood on 2 legs, but they were wrong. The knees were bent backwards like a dog's in a digitigrade stance that should not have been able to support its massive frame. It was tall, easily 7, maybe 8 feet. Its torso was lean but corded with thick, ropey muscle covered in coarse, dark fur. Its shoulders were immense, disproportionately broad, and from them hung 2 impossibly long arms. The arms ended in hands, not paws, but large 5-fingered hands that looked disturbingly human, except for the thick, yellowed claws that tipped each finger. But the head, my God, the head. It was the head of a wolf or a German shepherd, elongated and canine. The ears were pointed and alert, swiveling to catch every sound. The muzzle was long, lined with teeth I could see even from that distance. Teeth that were too long, too sharp. And the eyes. The flashlight beam caught them, and they didn't reflect green like a deer or a cat. They glowed with a malevolent, intelligent, burning yellow-orange light. It wasn't the dumb, instinctual gaze of an animal. It was looking at us. It was studying us. It knew we were there, and it was not afraid. Brian made a sound, a choked little gasp. The flashlight trembled in his hand. The creature took 1 step forward, out of the tree line and into the moonlight. It moved with a fluid, predatory grace that was utterly terrifying. It was not a monster. It was a predator, perfectly designed for its purpose. And we were its purpose. Brian finally found his voice. It wasn't a yell of defiance. It was a thin, reedy whimper. He took a step back, stumbling into the doorframe. That single sign of weakness was all the creature needed. It moved. It didn't run or charge. It exploded. It covered the 30 yards in what felt like 2 bounds, a blur of dark fur and impossible speed. The ground shook. It was on Brian before any of us could react. One of its long arms shot out, the hand enveloping Brian's head. There was a sickening, wet crunch, like a melon being smashed on concrete. The flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam spinning wildly across the grass. The creature grabbed Brian's body by the front of his jacket and yanked him out into the night. It was effortless, like a man tossing a bag of leaves. Jake screamed, a raw, ragged sound of pure terror. Corey was already moving, shoving the door. It slammed shut a split second before the thing could turn back. The last thing I saw was Brian's feet dragging silently into the darkness. Corey threw the deadbolt and then a heavy iron bar that was meant to secure the door. He leaned against it, breathing heavily, his face a mask of shock and grim determination. "Barricade it," he gasped. "Now! Everything! Windows! Doors! Now!" His command snapped us out of our paralysis. Jake, sobbing, started shoving the heavy oak dining table against the front door. I ran to the back of the cabin, my mind a whirlwind of denial and horror. There was another door in the kitchen. I slammed it shut, locked it, and dragged a heavy cast-iron stove in front of it. The windows. There were 4 of them in the main room. They had simple wooden shutters on the inside. We slammed them shut and latched them, plunging the room into near total darkness, save for the hissing propane lanterns. For a few moments there was silence from outside. The only sounds were our own ragged breaths and Jake's muffled sobs. "He's gone," Jake kept whispering.
God, Brian's gone. He is, Corey said, his voice like stone. And if we don't get our heads straight, we're next. Jake, get the shotgun. Arthur, the hunting rifles. Ammunition on the table. Now! We moved like automatons, gathering our weapons.
The familiar weight of my .30-06 rifle felt foreign in my hands. It was a tool for hunting deer, not for fighting monsters from a child's nightmare. What good would it be against something that could move that fast, that was that strong? The creature began to circle the cabin again. We could hear its heavy footfalls, the soft crunch of its steps on the gravel outside. Then a new sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very logs of the cabin. It wasn't the sound of an angry dog. It was deeper, more resonant. It sounded like a warning. It sounded like it was enjoying this. It began to test our defenses. A soft, exploratory push on the front door made the table we'd braced against it groan. Then a turn of the doorknob. Click, click, click. It was trying to open the door. The intelligence of it, the calm, methodical way it was probing for a weakness, was more terrifying than any mindless rage.
We stood in the center of the room, weapons raised, pointing in different directions, our backs to each other. A classic fire team formation Corey had drilled into us half-jokingly on past trips. It wasn't a joke now. The sounds moved to the side of the cabin. A loud sniff, wet and powerful, right outside the window I was facing. It sounded like a massive bellows drawing in air. It was smelling us. It knew exactly where we were. Then, the scraping sound again, this time on the wooden shutter. A claw was tracing the seams, looking for a purchase. I could hear the wood splintering. "Don't shoot unless you have a clear shot," Corey commanded, his voice a low, steady whisper. "Conserve ammunition. Aim for the head or the center of the chest. Make every shot count." Then came the mimicry,
A faint, weak voice from the direction of the woods.
"Help me."
It was a thin, pathetic imitation of Brian's voice.
"It hurts. Please, open the door."
Jake let out a strangled cry. "Brian? That's not him, Jake," Corey snapped. "It's a trick. It's trying to lure us out. Don't listen to it." The voice came again, more insistent.
"Arthur, Corey, let me in. I'm bleeding."
It was a cruel, psychological game. The creature was intelligent. It wasn't just a brute. It was a hunter, and it knew how to manipulate its prey. It was toying with us, breaking us down before it moved in for the kill. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the phantom voice of our dead friend beg for entry, while the real monster circled our flimsy fortress. The probing stopped. Silence descended again. This was worse. The waiting, the not knowing where it was or what it was planning next was an agony. Minutes stretched into an hour. We didn't speak.
We just listened, our muscles screaming with tension, our ears straining for the slightest sound. The attack, when it came, was not subtle. It was an explosion of sound and violence. A tremendous impact slammed into the back wall of the cabin, shaking the entire structure. Dishes rattled on the shelves. One of the lanterns flickered and went out. It had thrown something, a rock maybe, or a log. Another impact, this one against the front door, splintering the wood. It was trying to break its way in through sheer force. Then, a new sound. The shattering of glass. It had gone for a window in one of the small bedrooms off the main living area, one we hadn't thought to barricade beyond closing the shutter. We heard the wooden shutter splinter and break. It was inside. "It's in the house," Jake yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Corey was already moving. "Stay here. Cover the main room," he ordered us, and ran toward the bedroom door, his pistol held in a two-handed grip.
He kicked the door open and disappeared inside. We heard a roar. Not the guttural growl from before, but a full-throated, deafening roar of fury and pain. It was a sound that seemed to tear the air apart. Then the sharp crack of Corey's pistol. 1, 2, 3 shots in quick succession. The roar intensified. A heavy crash, the sound of furniture splintering. "Corey!" I screamed. Another gunshot. Then a terrible, wet, tearing sound, followed by a human scream of agony. It was Corey. The scream was cut short. Jake and I looked at each other, our faces numb with horror. It had taken Corey. It had taken the strongest of us in seconds. We were alone. A massive, dark shape filled the bedroom doorway. It was the creature. It was hunched over, its head nearly touching the top of the frame. There was blood on its muzzle and chest, dark and glistening in the lantern light. Some of it was its own. I could see a dark patch high on its shoulder where one of Corey's rounds must have hit, but most of it was not. It looked at us. Its yellow eyes burned with a cold, calculating hatred. It took a step into the room. I raised my rifle, the front sight wavering, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I remembered Corey's words, "Head or center of chest." I aimed for the center of its massive chest and squeezed the trigger. The boom of the .30-06 was deafening in the enclosed space. The rifle bucked against my shoulder. The 180-grain slug hit the creature square in the chest with a sound like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. It staggered back a step, a guttural grunt of pain and surprise escaping its throat. But it didn't fall. It looked down at the bleeding hole in its chest, then back up at me. And it smiled. I swear to God, its lips peeled back from its enormous teeth in a grotesque, mocking grin. Jake fired the shotgun. The blast of buckshot tore into the creature's leg, shredding fur and flesh. It howled, a high, piercing sound of rage, and lunged. It ignored me and went for Jake. It was so fast. One moment, Jake was standing by the fireplace. The next, the creature was on him, bearing him to the floor. The shotgun clattered away. I worked the bolt on my rifle, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. Eject the spent casing, chamber a new round. It felt like it was happening in slow motion. I saw the creature raise one of its massive, clawed hands. I saw Jake's terrified eyes. "Run, Art!" he screamed. His last word was a gurgle as the claws descended. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted for the kitchen door, the one I'd barricaded with the stove. I heaved at the heavy iron thing, adrenaline giving me a strength I didn't know I possessed. It scraped across the floor. I ripped the door open and plunged into the cold night air. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran blindly, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. The only thought in my head was the truck. Jake's truck, parked at the edge of the clearing. It was our only hope. Behind me, I heard a crash as the creature burst out of the cabin. It let out another of those terrifying roars, a sound of pure, triumphant fury. I could hear it coming after me. The heavy, bipedal footfalls were closing the distance with terrifying speed. I was a 60-year-old man running for his life, and I knew I couldn't outrun it. I burst into the clearing. The truck was there, 100 feet away, its metal shell gleaming in the moonlight. It looked like a spaceship, a ticket to another world. I fumbled in my pocket for the keys. Jake had tossed them to me earlier in the day. My fingers were numb, useless. I finally got them out, my breath tearing at my lungs. I could hear it right behind me now, its heavy breathing a hot, fetid sound in the cold air. I reached the driver's side door, jammed the key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. Wrong key. I frantically tried another. It slid in. I twisted. The lock clicked. I threw the door open and dove inside, landing awkwardly across the front seat. I slammed the door shut just as the creature reached the truck. A massive, clawed hand slammed against the driver's side window right next to my head. The safety glass spiderwebbed, but held. The creature roared in frustration, the sound vibrating through the entire frame of the vehicle. I scrambled behind the wheel, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I tried to put the key in the ignition. The creature was pounding on the roof now, denting the metal with every blow. Another hand appeared at the window, claws scraping grooves in the glass, trying to find a purchase. I found the ignition. The key went in. I twisted. The engine turned over, coughed, and died. No, 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 I chanted, my voice a desperate prayer. I turned the key again. The engine sputtered. The creature threw its full weight against the side of the truck, rocking it violently on its suspension. I gave it one last try, flooring the gas pedal. The engine roared to life. I slammed the truck into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The tires spun on the gravel, then caught. The truck fishtailed wildly and shot forward, down the rutted track that passed for a road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature standing in the clearing, illuminated by my taillights. It was watching me go. It raised its head to the sky and let out a long, mournful, triumphant howl that chased me down the dark road for miles. It was a sound that will echo in my nightmares for the rest of my life. I drove like a madman, the truck bouncing and crashing through the ruts. I didn't slow down. I didn't care if I broke an axle. I just had to get away. It was miles before I dared to look at the fuel gauge. It was nearly full. Jake had filled it up before we left town. Thank God for Jake. Oh God. Jake. And Corey. And Brian. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't make a sound. I just drove. It took me almost an hour to reach the paved county road. When the tires hit smooth asphalt, I nearly collapsed with relief. I drove for another 20 minutes before I saw the first faint glimmer of cell service bars appear on my phone. I pulled over, my body shaking so violently I could barely dial. I called 911. The dispatcher's calm, professional voice was the most surreal thing I had ever heard. I tried to explain what happened, but the words came out in a jumbled, hysterical torrent. My friends are dead. A monster. A creature at the cabin. I probably sounded insane. She kept asking me to calm down, to give her my location. I read her the mile marker on the side of the road and waited. 2 sheriff's deputies found me half an hour later. They were young, professional, and deeply skeptical. I was a disheveled old man, covered in scratches, babbling about a monster. They saw the spider-webbed window of the truck and the deep gouges in the paint. I told them what made them. They exchanged a look that I knew all too well. It was the look you give a drunk or a madman. They took my statement, but it felt more like an interrogation. They asked how much we'd been drinking. They found the nearly empty bottle of whiskey in the back of the truck. That sealed it for them. Drunk old men, out in the woods, something went wrong. A hunting accident, maybe. Or a bear. Yes, a bear sounded plausible to them. I tried to use my old credentials. I told them I was a retired FWO, that I knew what a bear attack looked like, and this wasn't it. It just made them more condescending. They treated me like a senile old man clinging to a long-gone authority. They took my rifle for ballistics testing and told me to wait. A search party went up to the cabin at dawn. I wasn't allowed to go with them.
I sat in the back of a squad car for hours as the sun came up, watching police and fish and wildlife vehicles stream past. Around noon, a grim-faced state trooper came to talk to me. He told me they had found my friends. He used words like tragic and horrific. He said the scene was consistent with a major predator attack. A black bear, most likely. A large, aggressive male, perhaps rabid or starved. He said they found bear tracks all over the area. He said Brian's body was found in the woods, and the other two were inside the cabin. I stared at him, my blood running cold. Bear tracks? I asked. Did you see the prints? Were they bipedal? Did you see the cabin door, the broken shutter, the barricades? He gave me a patient, pitying look. Mr. Cole, you've been through a severe trauma. Your mind is playing tricks on you. The evidence points to a bear. A very, very big bear.
The cabin was a mess, consistent with a panicked animal trying to get out after being trapped inside. He ignored my questions about the barricades. He told me the deep scratches on the truck were from scraping against tree branches on the narrow road. Every piece of impossible evidence was neatly explained away, smoothed over, and filed under a rational, acceptable heading. They held me for another day for questioning. My story never changed. Their official report did. By the time they let me go, the narrative was set in stone. 4 old friends went into the woods. They drank too much. They were attacked by a rogue black bear. One of them, in a drunken panic, managed to escape. A tragic but entirely understandable incident. Case closed. Only one person gave me any indication that they believed me. It was an old deputy, a man near my own age with tired eyes who was tasked with driving me to my car, which had been towed from the trailhead. We didn't speak for most of the ride. As I was getting out, he put a hand on my arm. "Listen," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He wouldn't look me in the eye. "I've been working these mountains for 40 years. We get a few every decade. Hunters who go missing. Campers found, like your friends. The official report is always the same. Bear, cougar, fell down a ravine. People accept it. It's easier." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a deep, weary sadness. "You stay out of the deep woods, you hear me? There are things in these hills that were old when the trees were young. Things that don't like being found. You were lucky. Don't push that luck." He let go of my arm, put the car in drive, and left me standing there in the parking lot. It wasn't a comfort. It was a confirmation of a truth far more terrifying than being called a liar. The truth was that they knew. On some level, they knew, and they chose to cover it up. To protect the public from a reality they couldn't handle. To keep the parks open, the tourist money flowing. To maintain the fragile illusion that we are the masters of this world. That was 4 years ago. The official cause of death for Corey, Jake, and Brian was animal attack. I attended 3 funerals in 2 weeks. I saw the pity in everyone's eyes. The grieving families looked at me as the one who got away, the one who should have done more. How could I tell them the truth? How could I tell Brian's wife that her husband was killed not by a bear, but by a monster from a forgotten myth? How could I explain that to anyone? I live in a small apartment in the city now. I sold my house, my land. I can't stand the quiet anymore. I can't stand the sight of a tree line at dusk. The nightmares are constant. Sometimes I'm back in the cabin, listening to the footsteps circling in the dark.
Sometimes I see the flash of those yellow eyes, the glint of those terrible teeth.
But the worst dream is the one where I see Jake's face in that last second before the claws fell, and I hear him scream for me to run. Survivor's guilt is a cold companion. I've spent the last 4 years on the internet falling down rabbit holes I never knew existed. I've read the stories, hundreds of them. People from all over the country, all over the world, describing the same creature. The same canine head, the same bipedal stance, the same terrifying intelligence. They call it Dogman. They call it the werewolf. The names change, but the description is always the same. Most of them are dismissed as crackpots, just like I was. But I know they're telling the truth. My name is Arthur Cole. I was a man of science and reason. Now, I am a man who knows that the map of our world has empty spaces, and in those spaces, monsters dwell. I am telling you this because you need to know the world is not as safe as you think it is.
The comforting laws of nature have exceptions, and those exceptions have teeth. So, when you go into the woods and you feel that sudden, unnatural silence, don't dismiss it. When you find something that your rational mind can't explain, don't try to rationalize it. Turn around. Go back to your cars and your streetlights and your locked doors. Go back to the world you think you know. Because what's in the woods doesn't care about your disbelief. And it is always, always hungry.